You already know that content is one of the best ways to drive sales, build trust, and stay top of mind. But actually creating content every week across platforms is exhausting. You're juggling product, strategy, and meetings, and somehow you're still expected to show up online with something smart to say. Well, you need a system, and especially a system that doesn't start with a blank page. The good news, you're sitting in a gold mine of content, your inbox. My name is Matt Paiva. I build AI solutions for businesses, especially on the sales and marketing side of things. And in this video, I'll show you how you can turn every newsletter in your inbox into relevant content without having to lift a single finger. So let's start this video off with a live demo, and essentially what you guys are looking at on the screen over here is an example of a content database where we can pretty much create any content ideas by clicking on it and adding it over here. And whenever we have a content idea that is worth pursuing, we just move it to the next content stage. Now, a lot of the times creators have problems to move these ideas into production and pre-production. So what we did is we created a system in make.com that not only reads the newsletters and creates the ideas, but also creates the parts that are related to the pre-production, like the titles, like drafting the content, and like the virality score as well. So as soon as we receive a newsletter, we just need to click on run. This would actually be automatically ran, and we can see our automation working in the background. So the first step that our automation does is to filter the newsletter to find out the headlines that are relevant to our business. A lot of these newsletters talk about a lot of different things, and some ideas are not necessarily related to your business. Then we're going to come up with some concepts for these ideas, essentially turning that headline into content that we could make. And we're going to create actually 5 different content ideas on this step. Use a JSON parser to pretty much split these ideas into 5 different bundles. And you will see over here that we're now generating titles, drafting the content, and creating a virality score for each one of these ideas. So far, we've created 2, and we're going on to the 3rd portion. And you will see your ideas being added over here as they come. If you click on the grid view of your automation, you'll see that they're added one at a time. And we can see, for example, that this idea number 2 over here was selected as a 8.5 virality score, which is pretty good. And one of the really cool things that we have here in Airtable is that this field over here is already sorted by the highest virality score. So we can see that the first portion over here, why simple video editing tools could fail, is one of the highest virality scores that we got so far with an 8.5. So we could go ahead, for example, and move this to the next pre-production step, and whichever one that we don't like, maybe this one that's beginner tips for product video swaps, we can go ahead and delete. So this way, we don't need to start our content creation process with a blank page, but start it with an idea that is generated from a newsletter and already evaluated for us based on a virality potential. So why don't we go ahead and build this entire thing from scratch? So to start us off, why don't we take a look at this Airtable database that organizes content ideas. If you don't know what Airtable is a really powerful database tool that you can use to build anything from a CRM to order tracking to a content database. And today we're going to be using it for a content database. And as you guys can see, it has a bunch of columns that I had previously created before. So let me go over these ones for you guys. We have an internal title. This is the title that we use internally to understand what type of content we're talking about. We have title options. This is a long text field with a bunch of title options for the YouTube videos that I have. We have the draft content, and the draft content contains a little bit of an introduction of what we want that to look like. We also have a virality score, and this virality score goes from 0 to 10, and we're using a very specific criteria to determine these virality scores as well, so we can then prioritize our efforts when we go to recording. Then next up, we have the status, which is just essentially where our content is in our content creation workflow. The next column is a content source, and here we're just putting where we got the idea to make that piece of content, so we can be a newsletter, TikTok, YouTube, an article, a podcast, anything in between. Then we have a subject line, and this subject line will be specific for newsletters. So if we're grabbing this type of content from a newsletter, here we're going to outline what the name of the newsletter was. And last but not least, create a time just to keep track of when these things were created. Now, this is my preferred view over here where you can see where your content stands in each step of the content creation process. And you can sort this by however you want. For example, we could sort this based on the virality score and sort this in a descending order. So everything that's on top is the ones that have the highest virality score. And you'll see that as soon as I put everything on the same list, the ones with the highest virality scores will always be at the top. So what we're going to build today is a make.com scenario that reads the newsletters in your inbox and comes up with content ideas that are relevant to your business. Not only it will create those content ideas, but it will also draft the potential titles, create a introduction for the video, and rank it based on a virality score. So this way you're not left with a bunch of ideas that can't really go into pre-production because there's nothing else in there. In reality, you'll have something fully fledged that you can just go review and move to pre-production right away. So let's go over to make.com and start building this. Okay, so to start us off, we're going to start off with a watch emails trigger over here in make.com. And by the way, if you don't want to go through the trouble of building the whole make scenario on your own, I do leave these templates in the description below. You can just go and access it fully for free and edit it however you want. So feel free to go grab that as well. Also, just a quick disclaimer, even if you do download the templates, you will need to understand the logic behind the make.com automation. So I would recommend that you stay in this video to understand what we're building and what each step does. So the first step in our automation will be a watch emails step. Here, you just need to select the account that you're going to use, the folder that you're going to use, and the criteria that you need. I'm just going with my one basic inbox folder and all emails. But if you are using a folder or an account that has multiple labels and you have a label for newsletters over here, that is a good idea. If you've never connected your email into make.com before, just remember to try to use any emails that you have that are paid Google subscriptions, essentially that you have like at the name of your company.com instead of at gmail.com, because that makes our process much easier later down the line. Now, with that being said, you can still connect personal Gmail accounts over here. It's just going to be a little bit annoying to set up on the API side of Google. So we're going to save this scenario first. And the first thing that we're going to select after our watch email step will be an OpenAI create a completion step over here. Now, what we're going to use in this build will be what's called a prompt chain. We're going to use 5 different OpenAI create a completion step because we're going to use the output from each one of those to input into the next one. So our first prompt with GPT here will pretty much read the entire newsletter and identify the points that we want to use for content. Maybe a newsletter is talking about a bunch of different things that are not relevant to the content that we post online. So the first step will be a filter step. In terms of models, you can use whatever model you like. The one that I'm going to use is the GPT-4o Mini, just because it's super cheap and I'm already really used to using that. And by the way, we're going to keep the same model all the way throughout all of these completion prompts. So the first thing that we're going to do is click on messages, select system, and here we're going to paste in a prompt. Now, in terms of prompting, you need to have a very specific prompt that aligns to your business. If you are downloading the system from me, the one thing that you need to pay attention to change is to change these types of prompts to your specific use case. So for example, you'll see here in the tasks that we mentioned on step 2 for our system to prioritize any newsletters that mention AI training, because that's the type of content that I make. So if you are adapting these prompts for your use case, pretty much what you need to do is go here, copy the entire prompt, paste it into your ChatGPT, give a little bit of context about your business, and just ask ChatGPT to rewrite the prompt and tailor it for your specific business. That's the best way to go about it. But in terms of the content of this first prompt, what we are doing in a nutshell is creating a filter. Here, we are giving some rules to the GPT so it knows what to prioritize when it's reading a specific newsletter. So for example, I told it to prioritize this AI training portion. I also told it to ignore anything that could be political or controversial. And I told it to ideate 1 YouTube video and 2 shorter videos as well. Now you can see here on this rules portion, just make sure that you read this and you adapt it to the type of newsletter that you're receiving and the type of contents that includes in those newsletters. Then the next section that we have is a context section where I give context about my business, about the workflow that this chat completion is inserted in. And I also gave a little bit of the content pillars. So these are the types of content that I make, and this is something that you need to adapt as well. And at the very end, we're just going to provide an example output. So this system knows exactly what to output whenever it is reading a newsletter. And this you can actually keep the same because this is just an example, but this will work really well for the next steps. Now let's assume that you already put this prompt into ChatGPT and you ask it to adapt to your specific use case. I'm going to select user as our second message. And under user, we're going to say the newsletter content. And here we are going to select the text content of the email. Nice. Now with that done, we are going to rename our step to call this a filter step. And this will be the filter. You'll see that the names that we put in each one of these modules will help us later down the line. I'm just naming our GPT steps because we're going to have multiple of them. So let's go to our second prompt completion. So for this part, we're going to select the same model, and here in the system prompt, we're going to paste this new prompt, which essentially creates ideas based on the newsletter content. So now that we've filtered the content that's in that newsletter, now we need to come up with new ideas of content that we have. We don't want to just reiterate what was said in the newsletter. That just pollutes the content online, and I personally don't think it adds that much value. So here we're explicitly instructing this GPT to read the output of our previous filter step and pretty much come up with 5 different content concepts that we can use on YouTube. One of the key things that I kept in this prompt that you should probably keep in yours too are these virality elements to craft these content ideas. These virality elements are based on an older Twitter thread that was from quite a long time ago, but they do work like a charm. And essentially we have 10 different virality elements over here that you can use if you have a YouTube channel, for example, or if you're using to create hooks for Instagram or literally any type of content. These work really well. Again, we are also including context about our business, about the content that we make. Here, I'm also including some context about the softwares that I have used before, just because the builds that I do are very related to the softwares that I know how to use. So it wouldn't make sense for this GPT to tell me to use a tool that I've never touched before. And last but not least, we have this output portion over here. This is an example output. And essentially what we're asking is that we're asking GPT to return the text being like this. Now you don't need to worry, but what we are doing is that we are asking GPT pretty much to create a list of 5 different content ideas and to output it in this specific format so we can deal with each content idea as a separate unit of content instead of a giant chunk of text. Now this step is important because it means that we can use one content in the newsletter to create multiple content ideas using our GPT modules. So once you have the prompt there and adapt it to your scenario, just click on user and we're going to use the output of our previous scenario as the input over here. And we just select choices, message content, and save this. Now for the sake of organization, we're going to call this one ideas because this is the ideation stage. This is just a brainstorming step. The next step that we're going to use will be a JSON parser. We're going to click on JSON parser. You don't need to click on create a data structure, and the JSON string will be the output of our previous GPT step, of our ideas GPT step. We're using this step so we can deal with each idea as a specific content piece, and so we can also add it in a specific row in our database over here. And before we go to our next step, we actually need to run an example over here. So I'm going to click on choose where to start and select a newsletter. Okay, I selected a newsletter that I usually read, and now we're going to run once. Okay, now once it ran, which will take probably like a little bit over a minute, you can see that the output that we get over here are in bundles, and we have each one of the 5 bundles that we had from before. Now our next step will be to use another AI model to create our title options, and here I'm gonna go with GPT. By the way, I'm gonna use GPT for all of the content creation purposes over here, but if you prefer Claude because it sounds more like a human, go ahead and just substitute these for Claude. Now I'm pretty sure that if you download the blueprint of this automation over here, this step that we just did with the JSON, I think you'll need to do it as well. So the way you do that is once you have your Gmail connected, is you click on unlink and then you click on run once, and you can watch these modules run on their own. This will pretty much ensure that no other problems arise over here. Now, I'm not super sure if you actually need to do this. Once you download it, test it out and let me know. Okay, so I just pasted our prompt to create the YouTube titles over here. And essentially we have a 3-step process to generate these titles. First one, to read and understand the idea, the internal title and the concept of the idea that we're going to create. And then to generate 15 different titles. 10 of those are what we call browse titles, and 5 of those are what we call search titles. Search titles pretty much address anything that someone might be searching up on YouTube. So these are more SEO friendly, while the browse titles are more clickbaity in a way. They're supposed to grab someone's attention when they're looking at a YouTube feed. Now, again, we're also giving the same context for the GPT completion step over here about our business. And we are providing the viral elements again, because these viral elements are going to be exactly what we're going to use to feed into the GPT for these browse titles. Last but not least, output format. And the output format will be 2 lists of titles formatted like this, because this is how Airtable actually receives the information and creates the lists in the fields that we have. So same step again. Here we're going to call this step titles, And our next module will draft the content. And what I mean by draft content for my purposes, I usually just draft the introduction or the first 30 seconds of a video, because I know that the rest of the video will make sense depending on the build that I have. But if you are creating content for other platforms and you want to create a full script for TikTok, for example, or if you want to write a full article, this is also a good way of going about it. You just need to adapt this prompt to ask for that. Now we're keeping the same elements of role, task, context, and examples in the bottom. Also, this step over here that I included in the prompt, the introduction examples, are real introductions that I have in videos that have performed well in my channel before. So as a quick note, for the titles and for the introductions or for the drafting content portion, it is really good to include your best performing content over here, because this will allow GPT to understand what content resonates with your audience and try to emulate that as best as possible. This also really helps so your content doesn't sound too much GPT created and doesn't sound like AI by a lot, and also has the tone of voice that you are trying to portray. And the only key difference here in our output format is that instead of having a list, we're going to have the introduction portion and then the chapters that are going to be structured like this. Chapters are where you can see in the video down below when you can click around these portions and select based on a topic. Now the input that we're going to have for this step will be the concept of the video, which we have from before. This is the concept from the JSON output, and then the title options. One really important thing with these title options is that depending on the title that you have, you're going to have a different type of like introduction. I always like to include something that's on the title in the introduction. So that's why I include these two pieces of information over here. Oh, and before, if I hadn't mentioned here, in the title generation portion, we're going to select the internal title, which is going to be this one, and the concept as well as our input. And the output of this will be the input of this. Now let's go ahead and rename this into draft content so I know exactly what's going on. And last but not least, let's include our GPT step that is going to evaluate the virality potential of these posts. Okay, so this is the prompt that we're going to use for our virality score step. And essentially, I'm just asking it to understand the title and the concept of the video, as well as the introduction, and evaluate based on a 10-point scale following this specific criteria over here. Now, this specific criteria you can change based on your industry and what you would like for a content piece to have. One thing, for example, that is not included here is how shareable the content is. And that's like a really key piece for virality. But for my purposes, I didn't want to include it in my criteria because I wanted to focus on different things like the emotional resonance, the clarity and relevance for my audience, and the value proposition instead of those things. You can adapt the criteria however you want. And we're going to save and call this a virality score. And as a quick note, in our Airtable database, the virality score is not a number field. This is actually a long text field because I want our GPT to be able to explain what is the virality score. Like, why did we attach an 8.5 instead of an 8 or a 9 instead of a 7? So that's why our output format also starts with the virality score and gives us the criteria on how it was evaluated in each one of the 7 categories. And we're going to click on user and input the title options, which will be this over here. We just need to look for titles to make sure that we're selecting the correct GPT module. Click on choices, messages, and content. I'm actually going to replace this and the introduction or the content draft, which will be the very next one. There we go. Now the last step will be our Airtable step, which is how we're going to bring all the information together. So here, just remember to start by selecting the correct Airtable connection. If you don't have one, it's pretty straightforward to set it up. And the first thing that we're going to do is select a base. For our purposes, we're using the content base, the table. We only have one table in our content base for right now. And here we're going to map out each one of the contents. Under internal title, we're going to look for our JSON and click on internal title. Under title options, we're going to look for titles over here. Click on titles and choices, message, and content. And whenever I click on these, I just close it right after so I can know what I've used and what I haven't used, and pretty much for organization's sake. For drafting content, we're going to go to draft content, choices, message, and content as well. And pretty much we're going to do the same thing for each one of these. Status, actually, we're not going to map status. I want every idea to come in to be idea, and the content source as well. Since we are using this for a specific newsletter content, we're going to select newsletter. The subject line, we're going to go back to our email portion and look for the subject line for the content that we're using. And this is pretty much it. Now we're going to go and save and go over to our Gmail to look for a newsletter to use. So this over here is the newsletter that I selected for this example. This is the Rundown AI, which is an AI newsletter. A lot of the times they have contents that I wouldn't go ahead and talk about. For example, this one over here. So this will be a good test to see if our system is able to spot these and not include them in the content. Now that we have this set up, I'm going to run once and go over to our content database and wait a few minutes. So I'll just wait until it finishes adding. I think actually these were it. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ideas added. And now we're going to take a look at these ones. All right, so we can see right off the bat that one of the ideas had a 10 out of 10 score. So let me take a look at what this idea was. It's top 5 legal tasks automatable with AI. I actually love this word, automatable. I actually like this concept. And when I'm reviewing these ideas, I like to take a look at the introduction first and then go over to the titles to see which title matches the introduction best. So in our introduction, we have the following text. It says, if your law firm is still relying heavily on manual processes for contract reviews and compliance checks, you're likely wasting time and resources that could be better spent on strategic legal work. In this video, I'll show you the top 5 legal tasks, including contract review and compliance checks, that can be effectively automated using AI assistants like Grok. By automating these essential processes, you'll not only reduce the risk of errors, but also improve the efficiency and allow your team to focus on what they do best, practicing law. I actually do like this introduction. I would make it a little bit shorter, especially on this portion over here, like the first paragraph and whatnot. So then from here, I would manually edit the introduction and go over to the browse title and see which ones I can use. I actually like a lot of these titles, but because our introduction says that we are pretty much aiming this content for lawyers and for essentially like law firms in general, I would go over each one of these browse titles to see which one has the most, makes the most sense in that context. And it seems to be the first one, why your law firm needs to automate these 5 tasks with AI. That's like a pretty interesting topic. Or something like this could be a little bit, while something like this could be misinterpreted, like 5 legal tasks you can automate in under a week. Like this could be for anyone, right? We would need to add something like for law firms or for lawyers in the end. So far pretty good. I actually do agree a lot with the virality score. This is a 10 out of 10 for me. And I'm even wondering what would be the 5 tasks that we can automate with AI, or 5 tasks that are in a law firm that we could automate with AI. So apparently what we had on this newsletter over here was this tutorial about creating a specialized legal assistant using Grok. And Grok is pretty much Twitter's, X's AI platform. And it looks really, really interesting. So this could be a video that I can pick up next week and like make a video about this. I think it would be really interesting. Or I could even use the concept of using workspaces in Grok to talk about different types of assistants that you can create in different business contexts. So this idea is really nice. It would be something that I would immediately move into pre-production. And pre-production to me means that I'm going to look into the problem to see if I can actually solve these things or go ahead and script what would be the 5 legal tasks that would be automatable with AI. So now that we've moved one of these ideas into pre-production, what I would do is to go over each one of the other ideas to figure out which ones I like and which ones I don't like. Let's say I don't like this beginner tips for legal AI because it doesn't make sense. I can just click on it and delete the content and it would stop polluting all of my content workflow over here. Maybe once I already have one of my ideas in place, I can go and delete all the other 3 ideas because I know that I've gotten what I wanted out of the newsletter. And now I have a clean content database to the future. And like I said before, I don't need to worry about starting from a blank page. I already start with a fully fledged idea that I can just go scope it out, build it out, and record it at the end of the day. Okay, so thank you so much for watching the video all the way to the end. I hope you found this helpful. And if you want me to build one of these solutions, AI solutions for your business, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to leave a link and my email down in the description below. So just shoot me an email with what you want to build and I'll see if I can help you out. I'll also leave another video over here that you can watch and learn a bit more about AI solutions for businesses. If you have any content ideas, feel free to let me know down in the comments below as well. And if you want to learn more about this topic, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.